So then, the soap opera continues. Battlefield 5's recent weapon balance changes have caused a great deal of friction between the core community and DICE, and a few news outlets are even picking up on that controversy now. Up until this point, the information we've had from DICE after Update 5.2, the update that delivered these controversial weapon balance changes, was that DICE was listening to the community feedback and that this weapon balance overhaul was not a static element, and that more changes would be made if they were needed. Well, as of today, we do know a little bit more about what DICE's plans are here. This time around, we're not going to see the TTK reverted, but instead, we will see tweaks and changes made to the new balance. If you remember back to late 2018, the last time DICE pushed through with these kind of changes, you'll remember that just before the team broke up before the Christmas period, the TTK was reverted to its launch values after overwhelming feedback from the core community. At the time, DICE chose to thank the community for their passion and helping them make Battlefield 5 the best that it can be. This time around, however, that doesn't appear to be happening. According to community manager Jeff Braddock, the development team will not be reverting the TTK back to its previous state, but instead will be tweaking and changing the balance that we now see in Update 5.2. Personally, I'm not that surprised by this stance this time around. If DICE did choose to completely revert the TTK once again, that would show that DICE didn't have the willpower to see out their vision for the game. But instead, it sounds like to me that we're getting some sort of compromise here. We're going to get a middle ground. And that's actually something that we've heard already from DICE a couple of weeks ago. During the Update 5.2 livestream that happened a couple of weeks ago, hosted by community manager Adam Freeman at the DICE offices, producer David Serland, he confirmed that despite Update 5.2 rolling out with these rather drastic weapon rebalance changes, there was already work underway on a build that somewhat scaled back the changes from that point. And if that sounds confusing, that DICE would push out changes in an update only to build another update to scale things back, and then neither of those updates at that time had actually been released yet, yes, I agree. That is really confusing. During the live stream, Serland stated that the team had already looked at a lot of feedback from their early blog posts about the weapon balance changes, and that the build being worked on for after Update 5.2 would remove elements that increase the TTK at close and medium range, but it would keep some of the ranged damage drop-off changes. David Serland said this was some sort of combination of the weapon balance before Update 5.2, so that lethal gunplay that many fans of the game have enjoyed since launch, and of the reduced damage at range that Update 5.2 applied. And he also stated at the time that he felt it was a lot better than the Update 5.2 settings that were due to be released just a week later. Now, at the moment, the only information we have other than what Jeff Braddock mentioned on Reddit is that communication about this upcoming change to the new weapon balance will come by Thursday this week, so just a couple of days' time, and on the same day that Wake Island is going to launch. That was stated by community manager Adam Freeman on Reddit yesterday. He's been replying to community members on social media over the weekend that once DICE was ready to communicate about this, then they would go ahead and do that. And that was in response to some community members simply demanding the changes be instantly reverted, despite it only being a couple of days since the update. So even turning around a hotfix in that period of time would be nigh on impossible. Not only that, it was the weekend, so most of the DICE developers aren't going to be sitting at their desks doing any work. It's highly likely that DICE let these changes run wild over the weekend, one of the most popular player times for Battlefield 5, in order to collect enough data alongside the feedback that the community has been giving to build a better picture of what these changes were doing to the gameplay. I've spoken previously about a bunch of goals that DICE set for this update to measure its success, and if you missed that video, then you should go and watch it after this one. And so I'm betting that DICE used the weekend's worth of data to see if their goals had been met, rather than measuring their success based solely on the feedback from the core community. Data collected from player behavior over the weekend would show a true reflection of the changes, whereas community feedback is always fueled by what the player thinks is right and wrong. and I'm not having a go at anybody there, that's just simply fact. Feedback is influenced by the opinion of the person giving it, whereas data doesn't have that bias. Both data and feedback, I think, should be used to drive changes, but DICE will for sure want to check their changes against both of those things to see what the overall effect has been. I've made it no secret that I'm not a massive fan of these changes, and that I prefer the lethal gunplay, the fast TTK, and the more hardcore experience that Battlefield 5 offered before Update 5.2. That's something that I fought quite heavily to protect back at the end of 2018, the last time that DICE implemented a change similar to this one. My opinion, having played with the new TTK and weapon balance over the weekend, hasn't changed, but it has been extended due to all the oddities and issues that this new balance has surfaced. The changes, they do feel rushed, they feel incomplete, and I don't believe the changes achieved any of the goals set before launching them. And I also feel that DICE must have known this themselves. Once the community started highlighting some of the issues the changes introduced, I'm confident DICE would have already had a view on those things because they were so blatantly obvious. And that then begs the question, why was this change pushed out in the state that it was? And another question actually, if DICE knew these changes were going to be received fairly controversially, why did they then not hold back on updating the game and instead fall back on these new updated weapon balance values that David Serland alluded to in the live stream the other week? I think I can actually answer my own question there because it's very likely that that update would have already been sent off to be certified by Microsoft and Sony for the Xbox One and the PS4. That would have locked in the changes and it would have left DICE no option but to go ahead with the update. But what this situation shows, in my opinion, is that DICE wasn't quite sure what they should do with the weapon balance, and they took a chance to implement the changes right after a really positive and entertaining period for the game. So perhaps to try and let the launch of the Pacific absorb some of the negative reaction to it. Now, if this had been the only controversial or the only disappointing update in the entire life cycle of Battlefield 5, I could understand that logic. It would have been the first time something the community might not have liked had made it into the game. And then I think in that scenario, the community might not have been so vocal and so strongly against the change. But that isn't the situation we find ourselves in with Battlefield 5. I've said this before. This isn't the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth time an update has arrived that has disappointed more than it's excited. So the reaction from the community was always going to be one of general negativity, especially when the changes in the update had been advertised as changes for people who don't currently play the game. This was never really going to go down very well. The lack of foresight around these kind of decisions being made and the appeared lack of understanding of the community around the game, that's a big problem for DICE. And to be honest, it's not really a situation that I've seen happen before with other Battlefield games. Usually the development team is in tune with the community on what's best for the game, what content is best to work on, what changes should be prioritized, etc. But with Battlefield 5, it's been a constant up and down journey, with some updates being smashed out of the park and being received really positively, and others just being completely off the ball. Since the end of the summer, up until Update 5.2, DICE was making massive strides forward with Battlefield 5, implementing changes to improve the game and adding engaging content like Operation Underground and the huge Pacific chapter. That was a real highlight moment for them. And then everything comes sliding right back down with an update like this one. And honestly, I don't think it takes a huge amount of foresight to see what an update like this was going to do with the community. Lengthening the TTK, that's been tried before, and it didn't go down well. Chances are it's not going to be liked this time around. Implementing those new enemy icons when you look at them. Players don't like 3D spotting anymore, and DICE themselves said before the launch of Battlefield 5 that they didn't want players using the UI to play the game. So a change like this one was never going to be received well, not only because players have now adjusted to the lack of 3D icons, but also because the change goes against one of the core design principles for the game. I think the signs were clear around some of the major elements of Update 5.2 that the core community may not receive it particularly well. And those signs were proven correct when the first blog post went out about 2 weeks before the patch was due to release. Now, either DICE wasn't looking at those signs at all, which would be extremely worrying, or they looked at them and they underestimated the challenge they'd face when they pushed through with those changes. Either way, I think it's really clear that from the very start that this update was destined to become a very difficult one for DICE here. If they'd have used past experience and recognized that 2 or 3 weeks ago that was going to cause a problem, we might not be sitting here discussing it right now. And instead, I think we'd all be discussing just how excited we are for the release of a new map, Wake Island. But instead, no one's really discussing that, and all we're talking about is some controversial weapon balance changes. So, things are going to change again, after they just changed. We're going to find out on Thursday what those changes will look like, but personally, I do hope what David Serland said on the live stream turns out to be the high-level description of what we end up learning about. That the lethal TTK is returning, but at longer ranges, weapons are still somewhat less effective, but they are more effective than they are currently with Update 5.2. Time will tell if that's really the truth or not. Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments section. Any and all opinions here are completely welcome. I understand that there's very little else that we'll talk about at the moment, so we might as well all discuss the weapon balance changes. But until next time, my name is Westie, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.